Welcome, everyone. We'll wait just a couple minutes as people are popping on and get settled.
Hi, everybody.
Yeah, I have just a minute after, so we'll go ahead. Celeste, if you're ready.
Yeah.
Welcome, everyone, to part 2 of our webinar series that we did last Thursday and this Thursday, October 13th, with GoManda and CASE, Council of Administrators of Special Education. My name is Phyllis Wolfram, and I'm the Executive Director for CASE. And it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Celest Austin. I'm sorry, Celeste, I had to get that out.
It's okay.
It has been my pleasure to get to know Celeste and to call her my friend and my colleague at this point in our careers. I've learned so much from her, and I'm happy to introduce her to you today. While growing up with her autistic sister, Amanda, Celeste grew to appreciate her sister's way of thinking. Dr. Austin was alarmed how most resources available did not nurture her sister's unique way of thinking, but instead tried to reprogram her with products and services labeled as cures and treatments. With such limited resources available, Dr. Austin's family made sure to celebrate whenever Amanda accomplished anything with cheer. GoManda, GoManda, that's the name of your company. From then on, Dr. Austin decided to dedicate her life to autism and studied the uniqueness of autism. After obtaining her medical degree, she is an MD and her PhD from the University of Texas Health Science Center in San Antonio in 2016. Dr. Austin knew she wanted to do more and walked away from further medical training to found a company called GoManda, named after her sister Amanda. Inspired by the unique learning style of her sister, GoManda is a company dedicated to celebrating the unique mind of autism. GoManda has created a platform that teaches vocabulary using strength-based teaching, a teaching method that works with autism's unique learning style rather than against it. You'll also have to say that today our webinar is really the focus of autistic individuals, individuals with autism. If you missed part 1, the recording is available if you were registered for part 1. It will also be posted on the GoManda website. You can see that on the screen, www.gomanda.com. And I would really encourage you to watch it because Dr. Austin talks very specifically about some research and some studies and things that we as special ed administrators and teachers and leaders in the field of special education need to be aware of. Let me just do a couple housekeeping. We will be watching the chat and the Q&A, and we do ask you to dialogue along with us. Dr. Austin will attempt to answer every question that is asked. We did last time, and we had a great dialogue with those that participated. So at this point, I shall stop and turn it over to you, Celeste. Thank you for being here today.
Yes, and thank you, Phyllis. And I really appreciate this opportunity. One of the things I told Phyllis when we arranged this webinar series is I really wanted to amplify and empower the autistic voices, those who have inspired me on my journey. So I feel this is such a great opportunity for educators and administrators to really listen to autistic voices. So this is a great opportunity. So thank you, Phyllis, for this. And yes, I'm so happy to call you my friend and colleague as well. So, and again, if I've already gotten an amazing introduction, so I don't feel like I need to speak more about this, but yes, check out our website at www.gomanda.com. So today it'll be a little bit different. If you've been to the first webinar, this will be a little bit different because we're going to be kind of listening in on autistic voices. The way we did this was Phyllis and I had interviewed some of the autistic individuals. She and I did it together, and then I did the rest on my own as well. So these are just interview questions that we asked them to kind of help us as educators, as professionals, what we can do best. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the person first and identity first language, and then kind of dig deep a little bit about school, what their experience was, how their autism has helped them with their current career, and kind of general advice to educators. And of course, as Phyllis said, please leave your questions in the chat. We'll try to address them at the end. And also, please fill out the brief survey at the end that you will get once you exit out of the webinar. This will help us kind of figure out whether this was helpful and what we need to do better. So your feedback will be very much valued. So check that out once you end the webinar. So I wanted to introduce kind of the 5 people that we will be talking with. The first is Grace Ogden Parker. She has been a thought leader in terms of autistic women, how underdiagnosed they are with autism, and kind of having more education surrounding autistic females. She's the founder of Baum's Social Media Consulting. But on the side, she serves on the board of Autistic Women's Alliance. So incredibly honored to have her on board with us to speak. Also, we have Kalen Bennett. He is the first autistic Division I basketball player. He currently is at Morehouse and has been an incredibly empowering voice speaking about autism, and especially in professional sports. His jersey is actually in the Basketball Hall of Fame. So incredibly honored that he gets to speak out and speak up about his experience as well. Also, Joshua Pham, he's a sophomore at the University of Oklahoma, currently a college student, and trying to, enjoying all the wide range of courses, which include astronomy. So his voice from a college student perspective. Last is also Matt Harmitz. He has been an incredible speaker, writer, consultant, educator around autism advocacy. He was diagnosed very young, and so had navigated through educational process, speech pathologist, all that, and has now grown to have his main goal and passion is to spread hope and to educate parents and educators. And last but not least is Dr. Adam Ehrman, who has received his doctorate in special education and specifically around autism advocacy. He is autistic himself, actually also a former special education educator, and the founder of Spectrum Educators, a tutoring service, and a collective of educators who are autistic and to help other autistic students, whether it's college level, high school level, or beyond. So incredibly honored for these individuals to be speaking. Again, these are pre-recorded interviews. And so one of the first questions that we asked was, of course, do you prefer person first or identity first language? And to kind of explain why. And to remind everybody here, person first language is person with autism, whereas identity first language is autistic person. And if you missed our first webinar, we really talk in length about the history behind each of these and what the preference is with the community. But what we're going to do first, before we see their answers, is you'll see a poll being sent out right now. And we would love to kind of see what your preference is, whether it's person first or identity first. Would love to hear what everyone has to say. And then you can always answer that while the video is going. So let's go ahead. I'm seeing a lot of answers, so awesome. All right, so let's hear what, as you guys are answering these.
When you're talking to individuals, it needs to be treated the same way you would pronouns, because every individual is different and not every single autistic person has the same way of identifying themselves, just like everybody has different pronouns. So that's important that people be respected in their own choices for themselves. That doesn't mean that the neurotypicals should make the individual choices on how it's identified. It's about the person who is being spoken to or about. Now, when you're talking about a group, it's best to stick with what the larger movement is doing, because the whole point of the movement using identity first language is that we're trying to break the stigma. We're trying to show that even no matter what our level of needs, supports, or difficulties or anything, we need to be treated like any other human being. And the fact that we're autistic is not a bad thing. We're not harmed by our autism. We just are autistic. And many of us feel like it is completely integrated into us and there is no separating us from it. So to say we have it or we're with it would mean that we could be without it, and we can't.
Person first language, and the reason behind that is because, again, I was me to sound cliche, but we're human. So just being able to say what your name is and what my name is before any type of discussion about diagnoses or any type of disability, it just makes the conversation flow a lot better. And it just makes both of us, whoever is contained in the conversation, feel really good about each other and feel really good about the conversation at hand.
I'm pretty flexible, actually. Before I used person first language, actually. And it was actually kind of after I did some research and kind of actually when I started talking to some people, some autistic people about, kind of why they use, identity first versus person first, that kind of changed kind of my my feelings on it. And actually, I would even say that prior, I actually preferred person first, just because the reason is because the word autistic in the past has kind of had a negative connotation to it. It actually used to be used as kind of like an insult. Nowadays, of course, that's beginning to change, and that's kind of the reason why before I used to prefer person first language, but now definitely I'm a lot more flexible. I would say I lean more towards the identity first language, but I could definitely use them interchangeably, but more often than not, I do use identity first language now.
Person with autism.
So I go with identity first language, and I wasn't very privy upon it because I grew up before this became a thing. And, it was talked about a lot, but the more and more I think about it, the more and more I think identity first language works better. I like the idea saying that autism is a part of the person, and it's an integral part of my personality that I can't imagine being without. So it's kind of like you're trying to filter out, somebody trying to filter out like a core ingredient in a recipe, and you really can't do it. So that's how I see it. I definitely side with people who talk about identity first language. And I know a lot of the students I've worked with in the past, especially the older ones in college, have said that as well. And they feel similarly to how I feel about it. So yeah, identity first language is preferred. I don't get mad personally if people say person first language, but for me, if you were to ask a preference like you're doing, I would say identity first.
Awesome. And I'm looking right now at kind of the poll right now. And I'm seeing that most people right now, 51% are saying person first, 19% identity first, and 31% with no preference. So thank you guys for weighing in on that. I think it was very interesting, kind of what, there's definitely a personal preference. And I think that it's important for us to honor that, but just know that there are two different ways of identifying, and to be really respectful for what that choice is for that person. So thank you so much for weighing in on that with the poll. So the next thing that we wanted to explore with our panel was, who was their favorite teacher and why? And we really wanted to figure out whether there was something special about a teacher's role in when a child, in particular, an autistic child, is navigating through the education system. So I thought this would be very meaningful and helpful for those who really want to understand their role. And so let's listen in on what they have to say.
I actually have one for each level of learning that I think, and it's funny too, because I think it has more to do with the experiences I got to have through those teachers, not any specific way that they taught. And maybe that's just how my memory works, is the experiences. But I had a first grade teacher that I really liked. She was, you know, in first grade, you get all your subjects from one teacher.
Right.
But I got to do some miming, and that was so much fun for me. I love performing arts, so that was a good memory for me. And so that was one of my favorite teachers in elementary school. And then in middle school, my band teacher, he was an amazing teacher for everybody. He just was very, very talented at teaching instruments and music and middle school age kids. And, you know, he was just the right balance of everything. So that was great. But I also think it had a lot to do with the fact that I was playing music, and music is very, I don't know, tied to experiences for people, you know.
Right.
And then in high school, my favorite teacher was my French teacher. And maybe that's because I had her for all 4 years of high school. But maybe it's because I really have a love for languages. You learn culture in the class as well as the language. And she was a great teacher and a nice person. And I even did some student assistant with her when that was an option. So that was a good experience for me to just kind of grow with a language and a culture that I was interested in.
Say in high school, my favorite teacher is my all-time favorite teacher. Her name is Miss Tarkley. She was my math teacher. And I do a lot of mental math that I can't help it. I do mental math. I cannot help it. It's just always happening. And she was always one person who would never, ever really care if I did mental math, because sometimes I'd be like the first person to finish the test, boom, boom, boom. In the past, a lot of teachers would say, oh, you cheated, oh, you this, oh, you that. But they didn't really understand, like, my thought process was, I'm just going through it. And she was one person who really understood that and took the time to really teach me new concepts, teach me new ways of thinking. And she was always a teacher who would, to this day, call me, check on me. So definitely Miss Tarpley.
I would say so. So fourth grade, I had a teacher named Mr. Hanks, and I guess I was just really close to him. You know, I talked to him a lot. I remember we read The Hobbit in fourth grade, and you know, I really got into it, liked it a lot. I kind of had just a really close relationship with him, and I thought it was really nice. You know, just kind of felt like it was almost like a friend in a way, just kind of, you know, where we were able to talk about, you know, just, you know, like different books and stuff like that. And it was just really enjoyable.
Mr. Moore, and he was the best. He teaches like math and history. Math that light.
It would be the teacher that found my math talent. I think her name was Miss Foreman, if I remember correctly. So she was the one that took the time to inform my parents to say that I actually belonged in a higher math class. And, you know, I think part of it that really played to me was that you internalize a lot of inferiority and you develop an inferiority complex. So you develop like, oh, that, you know, the R word was thrown around a lot and you internalize that. So any chance I had to prove that I was not that, I welcomed and embraced with open arms, as they say. So she was my favorite teacher because she actually spent 9 weeks worth of her break time to tutor me in additional math. And I thought that was kind of a way up. So I think she sacrificed the most for me.
Yeah, these stories were really, really amazing to me. Kind of the theme that I heard was a lot of tenacity and persistence from educators. And so, and I think when I speak with these, our autistic panelists, that was something that they truly appreciated. And really, they couldn't have succeeded the way that they have without that tenacity and persistence and that belief that they could accomplish things. And so, one of the things was Kalen had mentioned, he didn't really say it, but he couldn't speak until 7. And so it was the tenacity of his family and the tenacity of his educators who believed in him that really got him through. So educators can have an incredible role in changing the life of an autistic individual. So I really thought that would be very meaningful to hear. One of the things I also wanted them to speak about was, what were aspects of school that was not their favorite? What things that, as educators and administrators, what can we think about? And so let's hear what they have to say.
I think that emotional regulation is a big part. I think I would have been diagnosed under current diagnoses standards back in at least the 5th grade, because I remember having major emotional dysregulation in the classroom, and I don't think they ever even told my parents.
The busy work. I would say the busy work, but from another aspect, I would feel as if the aspect of school that was hard was kind of like comprehending the expectations of someone else. I feel like that was one part of school that was hard for me, because I would be used to doing something one way, but that's not how a teacher wants it. And so like, what I would sometimes do is, like, again, stay out of school, of course, talk to the teacher, but then also like study the teacher, try to see like what do they want out of what I'm doing, like the purpose behind it. And so like I would ask a lot of questions. I would ask specific questions, not just the out of the norm questions. I would ask stuff like, okay, you did that, why did you do it? And not forget the book, forget everything else. Okay, why did you do it? And I would ask those questions even in basketball. Okay, he cut this way, why? Wouldn't that bring the defense this way? Questions that would really make somebody think. And then once I get it, it clicks. So after I understand something, I got it down pat.
My least favorite aspect, I would say maybe just the fact that there's certain required classes can make it difficult for a lot of people, neurodivergent or not, actually, just because, I mean, a lot of people have, just a lot of difficulty in certain areas. Of course, there's different learning disabilities, for example, where, if you have dyscalculia, it's going to be very hard to do math. If you have dyslexia, it'll be harder to, do well in classes that, involve reading and writing. And for me, I think, so like, I'm really good at like language, writing, speaking, that kind of thing. But I've always had a more difficult time with foreign languages. And I guess that could be kind of one example of something that was a little bit more difficult. Like I was able to do it in high school, but in college, I had to take a Korean class that was really difficult for me just because the language is so different than English. And kind of, I guess maybe just like, I guess I would say overall, just having required classes sometimes can be challenging, particularly if they're in areas where you struggle a lot with. I guess another one for me is like, I've never been good at science. It's always been very, very difficult for me. And I always struggled a lot through those classes. And I technically made it through those classes, but it was very challenging. I didn't really enjoy it at all, but yeah.
Yeah, there's a couple. My mind always gravitates towards what should have been better. Unfortunately, it's what I kind of perseverate on. It's one of those autistic things. But yeah, I know high school football started off okay and pretty decent, but you know, there was things that happened there that I should have spoken up about, and just the culture that the coach kind of set up when I was a senior in high school, especially, didn't work. Kind of created like a tiered system of players where he valued the starters over those who are less athletically inclined like I was. And, you know, that creates an environment where kids feel like they can bully other kids because, you know, there's a much higher tier than a lower tier, rather than being a better coach and being like, we're all part of a singular unit. And kind of like, you know, I probably should have spoken up more about being called the R word there and made fun of for my stims and quirks and running gait that coaches and students would make fun of.
A lot of when we talked more with the autistic individuals about this, kind of the things that were echoed was more inclusive practices, including different ways of teaching methods, and just being inclusive in general from a social standpoint. It's very heartbreaking to hear any kind of discrimination occurring in school. And it's surprising sometimes of what aspects of school is considered discriminatory for that individual. So I thought that was really important to hear. And, you know, some of the things like being more clarification and being very obvious about what your expectations are in an assignment, or of what you expect from the child or the student. So these are aspects to kind of consider, and I thought that they were really great advice. I wanted to also ask, you know, as we've been talking a lot about identity and what autism is, especially from the point of view of an autistic individual, I wanted to ask this question: was there anything you wished your teachers understood about you, especially when they knew you were autistic or not, but what aspect of yourself did you wish that the teachers that you had throughout your life really understood about you? And so let's see what they have to say.
Just the sheer fact that nobody knew I was autistic is being missed, because the research for decades and decades and decades and decades has always been for males, and particularly male children, which really leads to a lot of misunderstanding and stereotyping, and even absolute misinformation. Think that we grow out of autism by the time we're adults, or that only males can be autistic, or if females are autistic, then they have what's called a male brain. And none of that is true. None of it. The reason why they call it a spectrum is because there's such a wide variety of, as the medical community would call it, presentation. But really, we're just all individuals, just like everybody else is an individual. No two neurotypical people are alike. Exactly. I mean, there's no such thing as clone, you know. We're all individuals, and we all have different experiences. We all have different genetics. We all have different personalities, and everybody has their strengths and their weaknesses. Impossible to see two autistic people exactly the same. And it's very common in our community to say, if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. The view of what autism is what causes females to go missed.
When I posted that I had autism years ago, because again, let's just be honest, autism does not have a face. It doesn't really have a certain plastered image that says, hey, I have autism. It's not really something that can be automatically spotted. So me having to tell somebody that was probably one of the hardest things I had to do, but also helping educate somebody that doesn't understand it as well was also hard because, again, let's just be real, this is an ugly world. So a lot of people will how can I say this? They want to understand, but sometimes the information don't come to them as quickly as somebody else who already understands autism. So there might be somebody out there who wants to understand it, but they're not as patient as, the strong-willed autism moms are out there or the parents are out there. So really, like, they would assume, like, well, you don't look like you have autism. And that was something that was said to me a couple of times already. But it was like, okay, autism doesn't have a face, so how would you know? And so that was probably a misconception that I had to really get out the way very quickly, is that autism doesn't have a face. And another thing that was kind of hard was everybody that's on the spectrum is very intelligent. So they would automatically assume like they're not on the same wavelength. I would say wavelength as the average person, which is completely false. Because there's some people in this world who are the smartest, intellectually intelligent human beings I've ever met in my life. And they're on the autism spectrum. And when I was growing up and stuff, there was athletes and famous people who would hit me up saying, I have autism too, which you would never guess. And I automatically was like, okay, cool. So this is a common misconception that nobody really took notice of because nobody was willing to really speak about it.
This actually occurs more so in the workplace, but I'm sure that it occurs to lots of people in the educational system as well. And it's just to be treated fairly and equally. A lot of times, people, whether it's an educator or just someone in the work, like wherever, they assume that you're lesser, that you might not have the ability to communicate or be as effective as someone who does not have a disability, right? That's called ableism for people who do not know what that is, where you basically discriminate based off of someone who's able-bodied versus someone who's not. But just really treating everyone equally and don't be condescending towards people with disabilities. Just because someone has a disability doesn't mean they're any lesser, doesn't mean that they're not as smart as anyone else. Oftentimes, there's plenty of people with disabilities who are smarter than people who don't have disabilities. And really, it's an individual case-by-case basis. It's the same way that you treat other people on a individual case-by-case basis is the same way that you should treat someone with any disability. Just, because you don't really know who they are until you get to know them. And also, of course, I think just staying away from stereotypes is also very important because those stereotypes are very harmful and, they get autism and, completely wrong. And if you kind of go off of that, you're going to have a very warped perception of what, autism and neurodivergent.
Generally, people think or a lot of autistic people are not empathic or empathetic. And I think that's the furthest thing from the truth that you could find. I think a lot of autistic people aren't empathetic and maybe express it differently than what you're used to, or show it differently, or talk about it in a different way. I think that's the one big one. I'm, kind of being seen more robotic and less. I know the word used to get thrown around a lot, but automaton, I think it is. Yes. So I think that's a big misconception, being like automated when we're really not. So yeah, I would say the empathy thing is a pretty big deal to me, that I care about a lot of things that have been on my mind still, and I'm wondering how the world people are going to live and survive through a lot of things, or recognizing that I'm still a pretty privileged individual despite being autistic. that, other people with autism or autistic people or people with other situations are nowhere near as fortunate as I am still. And I think a lot of autistic people are able to recognize that if, they're recognizing, oh, my family was supportive, or my family was relatively well-to-do, and I was able to get diagnosed younger and get services younger as a kid, or get support from my family, when a lot of other autistic people cannot, and they're in very hostile environments, even more so than me.
So yeah, I thought that was incredibly powerful, because it seemed to me that a lot of the individuals that we talked with had been victims to discrimination, victims to kind of assumptions about their capacity, assumptions about their personalities, based on stereotypes. And so even though, for, Adam, Dr. Berman, and even Matt, being placed in special services, and that I guess their perception from the outside was very harmful and hurtful. So I'm really glad that they had the courage to kind of speak of their experience. And then the next question was, for a lot of these individuals, I was actually personally curious about this, was, how does their autism, or how do they believe their autism helps them with their career, and how maybe the choices that they made in their career is based on their strengths of their of autism. So I kind of was curious about this, and I hope you guys are interested in this as well.
I think that what people don't know, and what I didn't know about myself, is that we can be very creative. We can be very creative people. It doesn't mean that every autistic person is super creative, but there are stereotypes that we have no creativity and that we're just these like robot style minds, but we're not. None of us are robots, not even the ones who are more technical minded. We're all humans, obviously, but many of us are very creative. And my favorite part of my job right now is creativity. I love creating content, and
as if it helps me think a little bit more logically as well, because I actually researched it, and I was researching myself as well. I'm not saying like every person can go on the internet and research themselves, but as I would look at myself and see how I would do certain things, I was like, okay, so why do I think like that? And it's actually common for kids on the autism spectrum to use logic when it comes to decisions, or even common things that we do. Like, okay, should I put it in this row in the refrigerator or this row in the refrigerator? Things like that, you always use logic. So even on the court, I was like, okay, he's facing this way, so I should go baseline instead of going straight at him. So being able to think about my next move and be able to think on a logical level is something I really think is a superpower.
I only got into speaking because of I wanted to kind of share my experiences with others. So it definitely helped me with speaking. And that's something prior to this, that, I never really felt comfortable doing. I didn't feel comfortable sharing my feelings. I wouldn't have, dared thought of, speaking in front of, a huge group of other people. Writing my book right now. I write on LinkedIn quite a bit right now. It's encouraged me to, read up on a lot of things that, prior I would have never looked into myself. And just recently, I've read, quite a few books on, just the neurodiversity movement and just autism in general. And, it's been incredibly illuminating, even for me as someone who, felt like I knew a lot. I feel like, I know probably, 100 times as much as I did prior to having educated even myself. So education, I think, definitely goes a long way.
After I graduate from college, I'll be living in downtown Dallas and work at the Bank of America. I would like to help people make money and pay for bills.
And so one of the things I think that you hear is just diverse, and just like in everyone else, there wasn't really a commonality that I felt was there, but I thought it was interesting to just kind of hear that. The last thing is, was any kind of further advice, any advice that any of these individuals had to give to educators?
Super important for teachers and just everybody in general to use the right resources to learn from. It's incredibly important that it be from autistic points of view, from organizations that are autistic led and autistic run. And I think it's important that we listen to the autistic community and real autistic people about our experiences, about what's true about autistic people, and about how behavior is communication. So behavior isn't something to be trained out of someone, but to get to the root of, to see what they're trying to communicate with the behavior. What helps is helping us with our anxiety, helping us with our emotional regulation. That right there in itself can help with the behaviors. Helping us have a voice, whether we speak with our voice or not. Helping us have some form of communication where we can communicate it without causing harm to ourselves or our surroundings.
Patience. I would say one is patience, because again, every student that you have that's on the spectrum, again, they process things differently, just like every other human processes things differently. So I feel as if you gotta be able to be patient with your students and also understand each student. Now, if you have 100 kids in the classroom, I understand. But if you're able to sit down, talk to each kid individually, one-on-one, it starts becoming easier to understand their needs and what they need in order to succeed in the classroom. Another advice I would give is research autism. Research what it is, research what you need, what you think is best in terms of the teaching methods, teaching methods that you may use in the classroom as well. Because again, I know I said this probably throughout the whole interview, but it's so important. Every kid on the spectrum, every person in life understands and articulate things very differently. So you have kids that's on the spectrum in the classroom, research what those kids need, research what's not needed, research what I shouldn't do, shouldn't say, because those things play a part in being able to have a very successful school year.
It would definitely be useful for, I think, administrators or, school administrators to, first of all, kind of have a basic understanding of neurodiversity. It would be a good thing, I think, just to teach people earlier on. There's a lot of things where it seems like if you're taught early on, it kind of, you kind of have that ingrained in your system, so it becomes really, really natural. There's a lot of similarity between the neurodiversity movement and the LGBTQ movement. Example is, the idea of masking, both those who identify as LGBTQ and also, those who are neurodiverse. Often, masking is something that we often have to do in order to fit in. Thankfully, though, I would say, at least for the LGBTQ community, there's a lot more overall acceptance. We've kind of seen, just how society has evolved. And I see that happening for neurodiversity as well. But I do think that teaching early on about, how it's okay to be different is something that's really critical in kind of shaping the future. Just, even our grandparents, a lot of things that, they would probably think that we're kind of crazy nowadays, right? Even though, it's just natural that, society's moving in becoming a more, compassionate, and understanding, society. But I think definitely teaching earlier would help, and some kind of way to facilitate some kind of relationship building with other people and as natural an environment as possible. I think that could be helpful. And I guess I'm thinking more of that in terms of maybe elementary school, flexible with kind of how you teach. For me, it wasn't just like too bad, but I know for a lot of neurodivergents and autistics that you, the way how you phrase things can, affect kind of how someone might take the information in. So definitely being willing to kind of adapt your language if needed, or just, being able to kind of alternate your teaching methods if needed, to kind of to help someone out. I think that could be useful as well.
Working with young families and children, autistic children, I would say that thinking of autism as certainly being something that's lifelong, and that you can't suddenly change the person from being autistic to neurotypical. I think communicating that the child's personality is, the autism is a part of the personality, in a sense that it amplifies certain things or changes how people process or perceive certain things, and that really does affect personality. The adage is that if you meet one person with autism, you meet one person with autism, to use person first language there. But yeah, I think that's really true, and to kind of see that autism can't really be ever removed from the person, that it just changes or affects so much of the person and affects processing and perception, that there's certain things that trigger some children and don't trigger other autistic children. There's some very unique strengths and some support needs that need to be given, and kind of just having like a flexibility with that, and like a mental flexibility with that, knowing that there's certain unique strengths and areas of need that go into the autistic child, and having the family work on that, and knowing that even day to day can be pretty flexible. Like there can be some days where the autistic child is really having a great day, and then others less so. I've experienced that before, and just seeing that it's kind of like part of the person, and it affects a lot, affects their personality and affects their day-to-day functioning. It just goes in and affects a lot, and kind of still, I think the still constant thing is to still form a relationship around that, knowing that there's special interests that everyone has, but especially autistic children, and basing that off and finding a way to relate to that is a good place to start.
So yes, I one of the things I kept seeing the thread was acceptance, and feeling like the ecosystem around them was accepting of who they are, no matter how different, the way they process, the way that they see information, and how they deliver that information. So that was something that I felt like the theme of the conversations tend to go. And so we wanted to kind of close this session up with a couple of other polls. We would love to get your opinion about a couple of things. And Phyllis, do you have anything to say?
I would just say I just thoroughly enjoyed the interviews that I was able to sit in on. I feel like I have a different perspective, and wished maybe I had seen interviews like this at some point when I was in my tenure as a director and working with teachers with autism. And I think if I were still in a school, I would use this as a professional development opportunity just to share, because we saw the different perspectives of the individuals with autism. As we go through this, my common language is individual with autism. That's common from being in the school setting. Celeste, your common language is autistic person. And I know now how to respect that language differently, or I know how to respect that language and accept it when I did not before. And I also know now how to ask that question And I thought it was very interesting how our first interviewee, and I did not get a chance to be with
Grace.
her.
Yeah.
Yeah, with Grace,
Yeah.
but how she compared it to commonly we talk about using each other's pronouns appropriately. I thought that was a nice correlation and that resonated with me. So I've learned something, and I will take this with me and continue to educate others when they ask. And I'm so glad that I reached out to you when I had those questions initially to learn more. So thank you for that. And I do
No,
have the second poll. Would
you.
you like me to launch that now?
I would love to hear if anyone here has had any kind of change of perspective of how they see language preferences, especially when it comes to autistic individuals. And like Phyllis says, I lean toward, we both have different leanings and for different reasons. But overall, I think we both have come to the understanding of respecting that person's choice. So definitely, we had a question in the last webinar. What do we do? How do we approach that subject if we meet another autistic individual? And what I've heard through talking with these individuals is you can simply just ask, and they really appreciate that. That shows them that you actually know and you care. And so they truly appreciate that. So I'm looking at the poll right now. And thank you everyone for responding to that. And it looks like actually we have almost 60% saying that they've changed their preference at this point. So I'm loving that. I'm hoping that's to a more open-minded. So appreciate that. And then we have one more. Is current. We just want to hear what is your current now. We have the statistics from earlier, and so now we kind of want to hear what your preference is now. And one thing also is all these individuals that I talked with are so excited to share their perspective and to kind of bring light to their experience. So I'm very grateful for each of those individuals. And when you check out my website where the video is, I'm going to have information about how you can contact them and whatever social media or websites that they're correlated with. A lot of these individuals are doing great work. Being advocates for autism. And so I would love to kind of help share their platform as well. Awesome. And I'm seeing now that there's more for no preference, which I like that because that means that you're open-minded and you're going to ask that person what their preference is. So I'm seeing 41% for no preference. Identity first is 33% and person first is 27%.
And Celeste, I would just like to say, I think yes. I said earlier my preference was person first, but I don't know that that's my preference, because when I answered this question for you when we were developing the poll questions, I said, I don't think I really have a preference.
That's correct.
It's person first is my common language and what I'm most accustomed to. And what I have learned is that probably when I'm in an elementary school or a middle school, I will be very cognizant of speaking to a younger person by their name or by person first, but maybe as a young adult, I will ask that question. And I will just have to learn how to navigate individuals and be very considerate of their preference. So I have to go back and correct what I said. It wasn't preference. It was my common understanding, my common knowledge, and what was common language for me all these years. But I actually answered this question to Celeste to say, I don't have a preference. I would use the preference of the individual. Mm-hmm. You're muted, Celeste.
I don't know what happened there.
Your PowerPoint did go off, but I think we were finished. I don't know if you had a few more slides that you want to pop back up.
There wasn't really. I don't know what happened there. That was weird. My internet's fine, so that was weird.
Okay. Well, now it's coming back. Yeah, we do have a couple questions. One is, can we have a link to the video? And as Celeste said, she is going to post these on her website at www.GoManda, www.gomanda.com. And you will receive a link to the video tomorrow. That link will only be active for 2 weeks on our website, on where we house it. But Celeste has access to the videos, and she's posting on her website. Go there. Even after 2 weeks, they'll be live. She'll have them up. Her contact information is on the PowerPoint. We will send the PowerPoint to you tomorrow morning, along with the link to the video for 2 weeks. And so I think that answers that question. But then there's a very specific question for you, Dr. Austin,
Yes.
regarding autism and deaf. It differs, but I never like hearing SLD kid or SPED kid. You want to respond to that?
Yeah, and you know, that's true, because I feel like those, at least for SPED, it's not very specific, right? It seems like a very blanket term. So for me, I always tend to lean towards more specific language, you know, and I think about that as, you know, I'm half Taiwanese, and so when just someone says, even for me, like, when the more specific they are about my, you know, my background, I'm more flattered by that. I'm like, oh, you actually know who I am. And so I think that's how I can relate to that, is like the more broad the language is, it tends to be more uncomfortable, as you said. And so the more specific we can get, that's why on our last webinar, we talked a little bit about using the labels of low functioning, high functioning. Those are not very specific. Being specific about the supports and needs is more helpful language.
There is a question, Celeste, where on GoManda will the video be posted from the previous webinar?
Yes, that's a great question. So I'm actually going to have a video section for the website. And so that way you guys can find it. And that will be made in about a week. You guys will have access to the link to this video for about 2 weeks. So wait about a week. And I also will be sending out an email to kind of tell everybody it's up.
Great, great. Yeah, we'll do some notification. I think we did have a question after the last webinar. Could you use this information? Could you share it with others? And that's the whole point of us doing the webinar, to share with others, to use it for trainings with your staff if you would like. If you have direct questions or want to ask Dr. Austin more, as you can see, she's posted, I think, her website or her email address on the first slide. She's easy to find. I'm easy to find from our websites. Go look for us, and I'll send you her way if you're struggling a little bit. But the whole idea was meant to create awareness and education for our leaders across the country, and for you to share that information as well.
And I really appreciate this opportunity. So thank you so much. Thank you for everybody for being here.
Yeah. So I think that is all of the questions. I see no more in the Q&A box, and I do not see any in the chat. With that being said, we will conclude our webinar for today. And again, my many thanks to you, Dr. Celeste Austin, for being with us today and sharing your expertise, as well as last week in our first webinar. So thank you, and I'll give you the last word.
Well, thank you. And I want to also thank everybody who contributed, all the autistic individuals, for their courage and bravery and their honesty. So thank you for them, for their input. And thank you for you guys for giving us the platform.
Yeah. You're welcome, and goodbye, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Thank you. Bye, guys.